to a few, and that's a tall order for an O'Neill. Thankfully, Pat heavily edited this, or you might be stuck here listening to me until tomorrow. Thinking back on my childhood, I had vivid memories. I have vivid memories of watching my dad set the type for Liberation magazine, as well as my father and mother drinking copious cups of tea. The kettle was always singing in our house. I recall us at picket lines, demonstrations, conferences, and at endless organizing and committee meetings, as well as watching wide-eyed and somewhat fearful as Roger engaged in all-day and all-night fierce political debates with anarchists, socialists, communists, nonviolent activists, revolutionaries, and cultural aficionados and comrades who lived with us or visited our commune. These included members of the hog farm on the way to Woodstock, who visited us and overstayed at our commune, much to my father's consternation, as he felt they should have been back home farming. I see him tinkering in the kitchen, sorting vegetables, cooking terrible green tomato sauce, or trying to fix the water heater while listening all day to WBAI, even through every minute of their fundraisers. I would be driven insane hearing them announce the phone number to call over and over and over again. But it didn't bother Roger in the least. And he never gave them any money. Thank you, the lights. That's right. Okay. Let's see where I am. I also picture him working all day long in our garden with a straw hat on his head and an unlit cigar in his mouth, growing every vegetable, fruit, and herb imaginable, along with loofah sponges. He would hold off on growing medical marijuana until years later when he lived in the Bronx, which he did. He did do that. It should not come to us as a surprise to anyone that Roger's gardening methods were a bit unorthodox. Imagine a 2-acre garden covered with large sheets of tin, old rugs to kill weeds, and worn out car tires for planting, and you get an idea. But what amazing peonies, roses, currants, asparagus, Brussels sprouts, strawberries, zucchini, and comfrey, and everything else you can imagine, he grew and distributed to many people who lived on our hill or in neighboring towns. Living with Roger meant living a life of voluntary poverty in a very particular form. Roger, aside from the beautiful surroundings of our commune, which was an old orchard, Roger was willing to forgo almost all the comforts and trappings of the material world, except the very essential coffee, tea, milk, peanut butter, apples, and oatmeal. He could sleep on a board without a blanket, would almost never allow us to buy anything new. He did not believe in traveling, other than occasionally to visit family and friends or to go to demonstrations. And he would not go to restaurants or let us eat sugar. The rest of us were not quite so up for this Spartan life, and on occasion we snuck out to the Dairy Queen or to purchase coveted new shoes. Of course, there was one glaring exception, I know Brown has mentioned it, and that was the books, and to a lesser degree, the papers, our artwork as children, which he carefully collected and stored, his record collection of folk, Irish, and resistance music, and his tools. To get a clearer picture of my childhood environs, imagine a house filled with herbs hanging from the ceiling, bird and wasp nests for decorations on the kitchen walls, and the basement, 2 floors, the stairwells, and the attic overflowing with books. Thousands and thousands of them. Add to this a barn, several sheds, 2 abandoned cars, and an ancient outhouse stuffed with books, papers, art, and tools, and you can get some kind of idea. In his defense, my father's tendency to hoard books and papers was done with the purpose of helping to document and preserve radical movement in communities' histories, and to share what he had amassed with others who were in need or had interest in his ever-expanding and often decomposing multitude of books and papers. Given all the books in our house alone, it should not come as a surprise that when our house burned down, the local paper failed to mention that anybody lived in the house, but instead reported, "Anarchist library burns." It had been a home that was always open to friends and those in need, and we virtually never lived there alone as a nuclear family, but instead shared it with friends, activists, folks we met through the Catholic Worker, as well as those struggling with mental health, substance use problems, or those who were hiding from the FBI. Ramon Rodriguez, who I knew as my Uncle Ramon, and was a member of the Puerto Rican Liberation Army, who hid in our attic for several years, comes foremost to my mind. As Bronwyn has discussed, the death of Roger's mother, his own wife, and his brother within a 4-month period, from late 1974 to spring 1975, understandably took a very heavy toll on him. And I think he got depressed, and he definitely stopped working for a number of years. After the fire happened, about 5 years later, I think he experienced a new low point. Yet through those dark years, my father kept going with us to demonstrations and meetings, and on occasion to the Catholic Worker. And he also kept making connections and forging and deepening relationships with new people, young and old alike, including a group of community organizers and Catholic peace activists who lived collectively in the Lower East Side, and then eventually many of them moved to the Bronx. As a result of these new connections, my father was welcomed and finally took up the invitation to move to Valentine Avenue in the Bronx with Jerry and Debbie, Bernice, Jack, Richie, Ken, Chrissy. I know some of you folks are here today. Eileen and Eleanor, who are nuns. Moving back to New York City with like-minded people really gave him, as Bronwyn has said, a new lease on life, and it restored his enthusiasm. He returned to work at the Red Cross, of all places, as a driver, which was shocking to us because he was totally inattentive and the world's worst. Slow but reckless is how he described his driving. Eventually, he would go back to the New York Times printing presses. Back in New York, he recommitted himself to live in accordance with the principles that he lived all his entire life. And when he got his own apartment, he began sharing this space with friends and others in need, and of course, many books and papers. I was going to college in New York City myself at the time and very impoverished. And Roger regularly dragged and lured me with promises of suitcases full of tuna to a wide variety of meetings and conferences, including NORAID and ILGO, the Irish Lesbian Gay Organization. I think some of their founding meetings, we were both there. Around 1990, I became more fully connected with the Catholic Worker and moved in. And after a stint taking care of his old mentor, Simon Dolgoff, who was a rabble-rousing left of the left of the left anarchist, Roger followed me back to the Worker and also moved in around 1995. He left his apartment in the Bronx, inhabited by a host of friends and people in need, with no supervision. With few notable exceptions, including at the time right after he had a stroke, Roger would live out the rest of his life at St. Joe's and then Mary House. While the stories of Roger's time at the Catholic Worker could fill many books, one thing that has always stood out for me was how well he took to community life, although I knew he was not often easy for others to live with. His ability to forgo comforts, even at an advancing age, and his unbridled enthusiasm to meet and welcome new and returning individuals and comrades, his insatiable fascination in all people was incomparable and a boon to the community. The rest of us would feel exhausted, but Roger could always be relied on to pull out the welcome mat and have the energy to undertake the never-ending round of meeting, greeting, and getting to know new people. While folks who met Roger the last couple of years of his life have sometimes remarked that he was very warm and jovial, but kind of quiet, which is a shock to me. I know that he remained very enthusiastic with every new encounter and would share with me and others all he had gleaned from his conversations with the new people he met. As many folks can attest to, he never gave up his insatiable drive to collect and archive magazines and papers from the Catholic Worker, intentional communities, peace, civil rights, and other resistance movements. Aside from his apartment in the Bronx, he filled a large stage, an auditorium at Holy Name Center, the basements of Mary House and St. Joe's, and happily lived in a room surrounded with high towers of his trusted and beloved milk crates full of papers and books. Roger also never lost his drive to see all sides of an issue and to play the devil's advocate no matter what. I can recall recently walking the neighborhood with him and bemoaning the new large luxury steel and glass housing going up on 2nd Avenue. But it didn't bother Roger one bit. Much to my consternation, he would nonchalantly say, "People have to live somewhere, and it makes sense those buildings are tall. The only place to go is up." I wanted to strangle him. The last time I saw Roger, along with Pat, was 2 days before he died. He begrudgingly allowed me to shave him, and when I told him I was going to call the doctor about his swollen feet and legs, he said to forget about that. "You're boring that doctor. He doesn't want to hear any more about my swollen feet," he joked. Jane came in to take pictures, and Teresa invited him to see a movie the next night about Angela Davis. As we knew Roger would have strong reactions, we joked that he would have to agree to hold off on providing commentary until after he left the theater. When I left him about 9:30 that night, in true Roger fashion, he started to head down the stairs to see if the new young German volunteers were down there, in which case he would go down and hang out and get to know them better, as he had done endless times over the years at the Catholic Worker with other new folks, and which he thoroughly enjoyed. I ran down to check, and they weren't down there, so I left him as he went to bed, or more likely to listen to his radio blast, either right-wing or left-wing diatribes, and to sort important papers. Although it is hard to imagine life without him, I feel comforted that he had the perfect last night, out with a wonderful friend at a movie about a subject that interested him, and also probably annoyed and enraged him. And that he sat with Teresa on the bench outside the Bean, stargazing and people watching, before returning to his books, papers, apples, and peanut butter. It seems so perfect. As Roger remains with us in spirit now, I wonder what he thinks about all of us gathering here on his behalf. I know he would not want us to make a big fuss, but I think and I hope he can tolerate us drinking some coffee, eating some apples and peanut butter, chatting, singing some Irish movement songs, despite his fervent conviction that Joe Hill and Sacco and Vanzetti were actually guilty. By recommitting ourselves to engaging and welcoming people from all walks of life into our lives, by living simply and sharing what we have with others, and by passionately playing the devil's advocate, we can carry on Roger's legacy and drive folks crazy at the same time. Something surely Roger did with many times throughout his life, with many of us assembled here, and we are all the better for it. We love you, Roger.
Therefore, to spare the crowd, I will limit my remarks to 10 minutes. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dan Narlock. I'm Bronwyn's husband and one of Roger O'Neill's son-in-laws. Today, we gather to honor Roger's life. Many of you here know Roger from his affiliation with the Catholic Worker. Others grew up for some portion of your lives in and around the O'Neill family. As has already happened, all of you can speak to Roger's activism and history better than I can. I am related to Roger and came to know him through the imperfect covenant of marriage, which throws otherwise disparate souls randomly together to form the extended family. It is from this perspective that the whimsy of the fates creates certain bonds that I offer these reminiscences and observations on our lost comrade and patriarch, Roderick Clement O'Neill. I first met Roger O'Neill on a rather slow-moving train, which was apt, because you get to know a person when you're sitting next to him for an extended period of time, with little more to do than have a conversation. And conversation, I would come to experience, was a specialty of Roger O'Neill's. I have to admit I was nervous about this trip. You see, Bronwyn, Roger, and I were on our way to a wedding, and this was going to be my introduction to the O'Neill clan. Of course, Bronwyn had attempted to prep me on her father and sisters. She sensed my anxiety, but her descriptions of their formidable personalities provided little comfort and left me more insecure than confident. Her family seemed like characters deserving of their own chapters in Dubliners. On the train ride out, Bron would make sure to seat me between her and Roger. The conversation was lively. Roger wasn't as intimidating as I'd feared. What struck me was his breadth of curiosity and interest. He asked about my family, my work. He had questions and comments on science, medicine, politics, current events. His speaking style had a strange feature, though. He managed to weave in long anecdotal digressions involving the exploits of people I didn't know and never heard of. Although the way he told the stories, it seemed I should. The conversation lasted for the entire ride out and had the effect of making the time pass quickly. Through many such conversations over the next 20-odd years, I was to learn that this was Roger's operating system. He was unendingly curious about the world and about people, and he valued so much the exchange of ideas. In particular, he valued playing the devil's advocate, channeling, whether he knew it or not, the French philosopher Montaigne, who said, quote, "There is no conversation more boring than one where everyone agrees." To my surprise, despite a long wedding that left us all tired out, Roger's agile mind was not fatigued on that slow train back to the city, and he picked up the conversation right where we had left off hours before. I tried to keep up with him, but his stamina at discourse was Olympian. Another man might have been insulted, but Roger was too good-natured to be offended when I fell asleep in his mid-sentence. And so I learned another thing about him in that action. Here was a man of considerable forgiveness, and maybe more importantly, here was a man who didn't take himself too seriously. We all have our quirks that, when strung together, can form an identification as unique as a fingerprint. Over the years, I stitched together a few of Roger's quirks. One, as you've heard, he was a lover of gardening as a younger man, but held some idiosyncratic methods involving discarded tires and tarps. The barren landscapes he created to suppress the weeds challenged the very aesthetics he sought the garden to provide. Two, he was a ferocious collector and keeper of objects from far and wide, clearly too devoted from the perspective of his family, especially those who lived with him amidst his collectibles. And finally, three, despite a long history as a landlord, he had a truly terrible instinct in real estate. From the outside looking in, Roger led a long and unusual life, but he had his completely ordinary features as well. For example, he loved peanut butter. Bronwyn always gave him a special jar at Christmas. She sometimes asked me to pick it up, reminding me to make sure it was organic and non-GMO and artisanal if possible. I suspected Roger would have been just as happy with good old Skippy, but he would ooh and ah over the exotic jar nonetheless. It may have been one of the few high-end items he accepted and enjoyed. Roger loved his grandchildren without condition. He was always eager to hear of their interests and activities and had limitless patience in their presence. Despite his early history of cantankerousness, I never saw that in him. For many years, the grandchildren came to expect the unexpected from Roger, often in the form of the unusual objects he collected on his forays through the city. The range of items Roger brought to the house was truly vast and eclectic, from ancient half-drunk bottles of wine, to amber necklaces, to Irish political pamphlets, to a diamond ring once, and everything in between. For the grandchildren, it was like having an urban pirate for a grandfather, one who brought spoils from faraway lands. Several summers, he literally provided us with a bounty of treasure, and threw in a treasure chest to boot. Those years, we buried the chest on Cape Cod, or in Maine with the Carhartts, and chased the kids while they followed the clues from a scavenger hunt that always ended with the ecstasy of digging up Roger's treasure and discovering its secrets. If you spend some time with the O'Neill girls, as I have on occasion, you come to see how their moral system is a product of their upbringing. I know Mary had a lot to do with that, but sadly I never knew her, and so I may be giving Roger more credit than he deserves. However one should properly assign the responsibility, the moral compass of the O'Neill sisters points resolute and true. Roger would never claim credit for such a thing. He was nothing if not modest. But there is little doubt he lived his life with compassion and service few can demonstrate, and this must have been a powerful influence on his daughters. Through all of the travails of that the O'Neill family endured, Terrell, Siobhan, and Bronwyn doted on Roger, knowing he suffered the most, even though he showed it outwardly the least. And their sweetness towards him confirmed that adversity would not corrupt the kind spirit that dwelled within the O'Neill clan. Roger was an easy man to like, but a difficult man to know. As he grew old and frail, he spoke less and less. But even in the old days, when you couldn't stop him from speaking, he was an enigma to me. Here was a man who may not have owned a television, yet kept and protected several broken refrigerators in his apartment. Here was a man who lived the epitome of simplicity, but with his lifelong fascination with politicians, priests, and revolutionaries, clearly devoted a lot of bandwidth to man's obsession with power and glory. Whatever the forces that mold man, I know enough to know they don't often make them like Roger O'Neill. Here was a man who for 70 years was dedicated to living a principle. I had been thinking about Roger recently, and I kept coming back to Montaigne, that prolific, crazy Frenchman who in certain ways was the opposite of Roger. Montaigne examined and extensively wrote of his inner experience. Roger simply acted on his. I don't know if Roger read Montaigne, but I think he would have liked the man. Both of them had an affinity for cats. Montaigne wrote of cats, quote, "In 9 lifetimes, you'll never know as much about your cat as your cat knows about you." That's something I hear Roger saying. In the end, Montaigne had Roger's number, and so has my final words on summing up the complex and lovable Roderick Clement O'Neill. Quote, "Any person of honor chooses rather to lose his honor than lose his conscience." Roger, we miss you today. We will always miss you. Thank you.
More people than I thought there was in this room. I was sitting in the front. I just want to thank everybody for coming out. It's incredible to see such a turnout. I had one very limited perspective on my grandfather. He was one person to me, and then seeing all of these faces and these people, I realized that he was many, many men. And so I really appreciate just the visual construction of that. Last night, as my father was, we were watching the rough cut of the slideshow that he made for his memorial, I remarked that it was difficult to believe that Roger was dead. We were watching these flows, the pictures, and I thought he's undeniably and inescapably alive right now. And that really led me to the conclusion that, Roger will never be entirely dead to me. I don't believe that he needs a body for his life to continue. I see that he has, my father's hands, which has brought us today, his voice, and my mother and my aunt's mouths, which tell us his secrets and his quirks and his thoughts. And he has the eyes of all of my cousins who see the East Village, who witness it and recognize it, and who are the witnesses of my grandfather. And for that, I thank you, and I love you all, and I love everybody in this room who's come to sit for my grandfather. And now I'm going to read a short poem. I wrote half of it about a year ago, and then last night I decided that I hated that half of it. And I finished it, and I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to finish it. Sometimes you're just pushed to do something, and despite whatever tragedy surrounds it, you still get a piece of art. And so the title of this poem, if you'll bear with me, is called "My Mother Describes the Anger of My Grandfather." So, my mother describes the anger of my grandfather like this: a machine filling him, its red tubes, red as a fire engine, glorious word-shaped fire. It would grow into his body, sleekly, industrially, like love, but heavier. Think wind, think the cotton gin of bareness, which borders on pathological. But now, in the quiet of this coffee shop, I see him, rather harmlessly. He drinks his coffee, the light of the sun in his blue eyes, and I think about that machine from all those years ago, the product of it, that we have all forgotten about. I think his whole body is like a bristling, bony Rube Goldberg sketch, which delivers us this afternoon the softness of his hand, the fragile spin of the earth, and other gifts of his anger. Thank you.
We're going to open it up now to whoever would like to say something. I think I'm going to bring the mic down and pass it around. Okay?
I really could probably go on for about an hour about Roger and the meals and feeling so close to them, but I'm not. So I want to say that I lived at the Catholic Worker and was Siobhan's roommate 20 years ago, and a lot of people were dating at the Catholic Worker at the time, including myself with my husband Brian. And it's hard to date people at the Catholic Worker because you're living in a community and you have a lot of people around. And Brian was going to school in Fordham in the Bronx, and Roger let Brian stay at his apartment. And that, for me, is a major life changer because I could go hang out with Brian in the Bronx, and I ended up getting a job in the Bronx, staying in the Bronx. But we were only one of many, many, many people that Roger provided hospitality to in the Bronx and in other places. And I want to tell just a little story about Roger, living in Roger's space that is so uplifting. So Roger, you know Roger collects things, mostly words and lots of books. And he had a library in that apartment, and he had divided it into genre. God bless him. So Brian and I used to just get the greatest joy out of getting a six-pack, going to the apartment, and going to the self-help section, and basically making fun of everyone. Now we know we should have been paying attention. Anyway, so for all that, and then Siobhan, of course, found us an apartment, and we've always been really physically close to Siobhan and Pat and the girls, but they are also, I am fortunate to be part of Bronwyn's God family, and Bronwyn and Shuri, and Pat, Siobhan, Frida's God family. And the last thing I want to say, and so I've always really, it's a pleasure to me that I have been able to be close to the O'Neill family, all of them. And then the second thing I want to say about Roger is that it was brilliant to know someone, Dan talked about this a lot, but Roger was like the king of the tete-a-tete. Am I right? Like you're in a kitchen where we're trying to serve 300 people soup, and there's Roger, and he's just like, you and Roger, you are like having a conversation about that thing. And a lot of it was bachiche. He was not a gossip, but he knew people's business. And I was thinking, when Mary came with me, every time Roger would be like, how is Mary Daly from the Northwest Bronx? How is Eileen Martin? I mean, he knew everyone and cared so deeply. And it was a real gift to me to have known Roger and to have known her. Oh, just the other thing Brian asked me to say was, one time Roger thought he was going to help a priest get back to the Bronx. So anybody that knew Father Fitzpatrick, he was like 4'8", and Roger was like, I better go back with him because it's a little dangerous walking. And it turns out that Father Fitzpatrick was like the patron saint of Puerto Rico, and Roger's walking down the street with him, and people are on their knees kissing Father Fitzpatrick's feet, but Roger's there to protect him. So.
I had good stuff, but it didn't matter because Roger welcomed me. He accepted me, and and made a huge impression on him that I was the captain of the 6th grade basketball team. And whenever I saw him, and the last time I saw him was at the Carhartt's 50th up in Maine, he said to me, "So, how was it like to be the captain of the basketball team?" He always remembered me in that vein, and I will always remember his warm and welcoming just personality and these beautiful girls that he raised and these beautiful grandchildren.
New Jersey in the 60s, and he was like a father to me as well, because my father was away as a seaman, and he was just so unjudgmental. We would go for these long walks, crazy when I think of it now as being a father, over the hill, just to tell stories. He'd walk over the hill going nowhere and come back, and I didn't question it at the time. My own father would ask me, and I would just say that that's how he was, and tell lots of stories. And then the next generation down, when we came back from Ireland, he took me and several of my brothers in as we came to the Bronx, as the two girls know. And I also had the experience of thinking, is this what American life is like? A Bronx apartment with all the toilets and all the stairways filled with books. And to go from one apartment to the next, you actually climbed out over like the balcony and the roof and so forth. I looked down at that, he said, there's nowhere nothing will happen to you. To these last decade or two, when I was studying medicine, and he influenced me in the sense of doing some service and wanted me to go up into the Bronx and do work with indigent people. But coming into him, and as many people have testified, his memory just being incredibly encyclopedic. He has never set foot in Ireland despite my family begging him to come over these decades, but his roots in the Irish Republican tradition, in the sense of small farmers, and in bringing that back across the Atlantic was really very inspiring. So even though I'm really very sad, more sad than I can express, I'm also happy that so many people have come out and are sharing some things, and kind of his spirit goes on. There's not many times that someone like this passes through as a comet, and so he leaves us all with some great inspiration. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
I think in a certain way I can speak for the community, and for the two of you in particular, Patrick himself, the three of you, and for the children, maybe for all of us. Part of me wants to say thank you. And then the other part of me sort of realizes that I am blessed by the same gift that you were blessed with, and that you spoke of so beautifully today, both of you, all those members of the family. So start there. For some reason, my mind begins to race listening to this and being present in this company, and I'm thinking of Jeanette Noel, and I'm thinking of Margaret Murphy, I'm thinking of Cassie Temple, and I'm thinking of Frank Donovan, and I'm thinking a great deal about Roger O'Neill. So if all of those names are not familiar to all of you, this is sort of the deep state of the Catholic worker. So stories that come to mind very quickly for myself. Roger came back to the Catholic worker very shortly after I came to the Catholic worker. And it's the earliest interaction I remember with him. I only knew him at that time as an old Catholic worker, serious old-time Catholic worker, good friend of Dorothy's. In fact, I had been told that he was Dorothy Day's bodyguard. That Dorothy Day didn't particularly like to go out into very heavy, crowded places. And she would do that only if accompanied often by Roger. You might understand, you could see some of the photos of Roger, but you very quickly got used to a Roger handshake. It was a hand like bedrock. It was small, but you never got your hand around his. He always clamped his hand more quickly, and he had you. So I was in the kitchen. It was early in the morning. I had the house shift, and there was a young woman on the street. She was a prostitute. Her name was Susan. Knowing her last name, she went by the name Ginger. She had scabs all over her skin, and she would come by the house early looking for coffee, or most likely looking for a place to sleep just for a little while. And so it was all new to me, and I told her that she could lie down on the bench in the back, and she lay down and went fast asleep, and I went about my business, and Roger came in. And I thought to myself, you didn't get her a pillow, you didn't get her a blanket, you didn't do particularly good hospitality, and here's Dorothy Day's friend. And Roger stopped when he came to the kitchen, looked at her, and then he looked at me, and he said, "We are still the only game in town." And I felt greatly embraced by that. There were a number of occasions where I also went to, people talk about Roger's affection for people who are in sort of some other space psychologically, or people who are really down and out. And Roger always being extraordinarily kind, particularly to the Irish who used to hang out in the park in Little Italy. And he made regular visits over there with sandwiches of various sorts for the guys who were, you know, for the most part drunken and allowed by the local mafia to hang out in this park, a little haven for them. A couple of them came through our house also and stayed with us a period of time and recovered. So God bless Roger for that. Somewhere in Roger's 70s, he went out one night and came back with a gash on his face, which is a scar until, you could see it on his face even just before he died. Had a scar on his face that he was slashed in the face. And he was definitely in his 70s. Part of it is that he was, I'm trying to suggest to you that Roger was actually quite courageous. So Gandhi said, that you should not succumb to fear. It is better to be violent than to succumb to fear. Better than to engage in violence. Roger didn't actually engage in violence. He ran into two guys who were both younger than him, who were both, I don't know if they were stronger than him, who were both drunk. And they got into a fight. And Roger broke up the fight and got hit in the fight. And I'm like, Raj, what did you do? And he told me, and I'm like, Raj, you're not a kid anymore. And he said, yeah. He said, but those guys might have hurt themselves. So in the way, the first story I told was very, it felt like a sort of embrace very early on. There was a day where I was very down and out, and I can tell you that I was frankly, seriously down and out, and in some sort of despair. And he just stopped me on the steps and put his hand on my shoulder and pointed at me and said, persevere, persevere. And coming from him, it meant an enormous amount, and so I think I've continued to persevere.
I also lived in community with Raj for the last period of his life. As a matter of fact, I had visited the worker in the 60s, and when I came back in the mid-90s, or late 90s, Roger and Whiskers were the first two people I met, and I stayed anyway. So, that was a hell of an introduction. One was on one side, and I said, can I help? And Raj kept handing me bad vegetables, saying, just cut off the bad parts. Roger's love of books and and understanding that property is theft was a great influence on me. We had a gentleman, a Christian brother who lived at LaSalle, who used to come by in the morning and cut vegetables for whomever was making soup that morning. And one morning, there was a guy named Brother Jerry. He was just great. Spent most of his life in Kenya. And Brother Jerry was there cutting vegetables, and Raj came down and said, you were asking me about Dorothy Day. Here's 3 great books that you should read. Now, Carmen knows that he can always borrow my Dorothy Day books if he's giving a talk to a group of students. And either of us may leave them in the kitchen for a few minutes. And as he was handing Jerry the books, I saw the cover and had a coffee stain exactly where my copy of that Dorothy Day book had been stained. And I said, Raj, can I see that book? And he handed it to me. and it had my name in it, in my writing, and I assumed rashly that it was mine. And I took all three, and they all had my name in them in my handwriting. And I said, Raj, where did you get these books? And this happened with other things. Roger could not take that seriously. And rightfully, like, by his own ethos, he was so right. And it was like, you already read the damn books, you know? So one last story I told you when I first met him. I was one of the people here when Roger died. And I want you to know, because I think this is as fitting a tribute to Roger as I can think of, that for us to be able to let the EMTs into the small room where Roger had died, we had to move 4 crates of books.
Their kind of unionism, a unionism that believed in transforming society from the bottom up. I first met Roger at a point in the Wobblies history that was not a high point. In the early 2000s, we were meeting at ABC No Rio, not far from here, and each month, like clockwork, a somewhat elderly gentleman would come, and I had joined the IWW not because of a historical knowledge, but because of working in fast food and retail with the only union that would help at that time. But what Roger taught me and showed me was the legacy. We've heard of his care for Sam Dolgoff, one of the most important American revolutionaries in history. Roger cared for him in his remaining years. It's hard to imagine Roger gone because, as several people have said, he had an encyclopedic knowledge of people. And yes, he did mention a lot of obscure stories, but he also taught us about folks we had read about in books that were his contemporaries and his collaborators. So it's difficult to imagine such an enduring force not there. Who's gonna tell these stories with Roger gone? Who's gonna share this legacy? Who's gonna tell Roger O'Neill's story? You will. We will. Thank you.
I'm Lily. I'm one of his grandchildren. And I don't know what words I'm going to try and sing over the frog in my throat. It's an Irish folk song, Sally Gardens. So I never got to sing for him this time.
She passed us I could walk that 5 miles anytime I needed to, and Roger was always loving and kind and had a kettle on and a conversation, and I always felt safe there, and it meant so much to me. And one of my first memories was going on a really scary car ride in a Volkswagen Beetle into New York City to the Catholic Worker, and then Roger making a point to go to Yonah Schimmel's for some Jewish food because he knew our family was Jewish. And, you know, it was just, it was a world I knew nothing about, but he opened my eyes to many things. And, you know, my paths with his daughters have crisscrossed over and over again. Terrell lived near where I lived. She came up to, I was going to UConn, and she came up and met a group of friends. And then a bunch of them all moved to California. So it was like a strange weaving. And Siobhan and I were roommates in New York City. We were both in college. And Bronwyn, I went to your wedding. And we just have always, you know, it's mysterious and wonderful to me. But it was really, I told them, really, I don't have the words for the honor that it was to be able to help with their family when Terrell was sick. You know, Terrell's friends in California always bought me a plane ticket because I had time but no money. And they bought me several plane tickets to go out there, and I was tasked with the job to help Roger feel comfortable. And it meant so much to me to know that he would feel safe in my company, that I could go out there and help the family, and that, you know, Roger had a buddy, and one of Terrell's friends had rented a little apartment down the few blocks down from where they lived, and Roger and I would walk on the beach and up to the house every morning, and so he was like my little friend, and we had many conversations, and it was just wonderful. And I don't even have the words to say how much your family means to me. I think you all know that. So anyway, I wrote down a little thing. Roger loved to tell a story, but he especially loved to hear a story. Actually, I'm not sure about that. He probably more loved to tell a story. Now that I read that. He had unbounded curiosity for everyone and everything. He was fascinated by the religious, spiritual, and social ties that bind humans to one another, but was equally fascinated by the natural world, like how gophers came to overpopulate certain San Francisco neighborhoods. I actually saw Roger in Terrell's garden. We were sitting out there, and one of her roommates grew some vegetables, and there was a carrot stem wiggling. And Roger went right down on the ground, like all on all fours. He was fascinated as this thing pulled down. The gopher ate it from beneath. He couldn't get over it. Couldn't get over it. He was like, how did they get here? Roger was a quiet radical in today's world. He never owned anything he wasn't willing to give away, except for his address book, the one held together with the rubber bands. Wouldn't give that away. He was always interested in the connections. He was always asking, like, do you remember so-and-so? And did you know, like Dan said, half the time I had no idea who he was talking about, but you know, it was he cared deeply about connecting people, as Terrell also, you know, was very instrumental in connecting people with each other, and I think Roger, that was really important to him. Most precious to me was Roger's innate recognition of every person's dignity. He understood that everyday gestures, one kind word, one laugh, one question, or one strong hand could lift the spirit of someone who felt lost. Roger never expected notoriety or measurable results for his service, just lived with an open heart every day. He understood that each small interaction can become an important connection, and that feeling connected helps us be our best selves. Roger's example gives my heart courage and hope, knowing that we all have the capacity for simple acts of kindness and compassion every day and for a lifetime. Be in our hearts always, Roger, my dear.
So, So I'm grief, but my heart is deep for Roger and their mates, and the girls and their children, and their husbands, the extended friends. And I stand here in honor to Roger O'Neill. I feel peace, love, and understanding. Roger was a big part of my life. He loved me as a daughter. And his girls know that. And my close friends know that. He took all of us under his wing. Be not afraid, follow me. John 14:27. Jeromaragath, God is with you.
Reminded of a quote from Malatesta, in some way talking about the spirit that I experienced with him. By anarchist spirit, I mean the deeply human sentiment which aims at the good of all, freedom and justice for all, solidarity and love among people, which is not an exclusive characteristic of self-declared anarchists, but inspires people who have a generous heart and an open mind. His wing always made me feel home. He lived with his ideals in this messy and imperfect world and inspired others to try to do the same. In the end, I'm reminded of another quote by Malatesta, which says, "Achieving anarchy today, tomorrow, or within 10 centuries, but walking towards it today, tomorrow, and always." Roger inspires me and many others. Thank you.
No, literally, I should be put on a timer, like 5 minutes or 2 minutes, because you can't stop me now. Okay, that'll be really good. It is now 3:59. All right. Well, I loved Roger. That does not mean I was in love with Roger, but we had a relationship. And it was fascinating to me. And I live on 2nd Street, the 3rd floor. I'm right in the middle of this insanity. And I'm crazier than everybody else. Don't let me talk about myself. This is about Roger. So I would call up sometimes and get them on over at 1st Street. "Oh, is Roger there?" And they would say, "Who is this? Is it what? Who? Excuse me, but who's this?" And I said, "Well, this is Susan Sarandon. And Roger and I have a relationship." And because Roger would say, "I won't speak to anybody but Susan Sarandon." So that works. And I finally figured out why he chose Susan Sarandon as my surrogate. You know that word. But oh, forgive me, oh my God, help me. No, I don't mean surrogate. Strike that. No surrogate. Forget the surrogates. Where were we?
Why did Roger choose?
Wait a second. Well, this is what happens when I'm interrupted. So I finally figured it out. The reason Roger would only talk to Susan Sarandon was that all of his daughters looked very much like Susan Sarandon, only prettier. They're prettier. So I would call up and say, "Please tell Roger that Susan Sarandon is on the phone." And right away he would come. He gets on the phone and he says, "The wedding is off. We're not getting married." And, well, this is only the beginning. This is only the beginning. That's a joke. That's supposed to be funny. Oh, that's good, that's good. Well, all right, now, how many minutes have I consumed of people's patience? Is this enough? Okay.
Think about Ellen Glick, who a lot of us knew. Roger somehow was able to understand or try to understand and communicate with. I think of the deli crowd, the people that used to come to these quirky people that were, so appropriate at the Catholic Worker that Roger welcomed, and that really taught us a lot about hospitality. Roger taught us a lot about hospitality. I feel he just embodied it. So I'm going to miss him.
I was thinking, I'm Patrick O'Neill from the Father Charlie Mulholland Catholic Worker in Garner, North Carolina, right outside of Raleigh. Beth Brockman and I came up to be part of this gathering to honor Roger. The word that comes to mind after thinking about the many times I came through the door of St. Joe's, and what I always say when I come to New York is I come to the mother house. These are the mother houses, and for me as a Catholic worker from 500 miles away, I like to come to this place, and I feel like it's home, right? And New York can be one of those places that's kind of, you're walking down the street in New York and it can be kind of a dark place sometimes. You can see a lot of people who are fragile. So it was very nice to finally see the entrance to Joseph House and come in and hope that Roger was there. Because the feeling you get when you came in the midst of all of this calamity of being in Manhattan and just coming through the Hollow Tunnel or however you got here, is intimacy. And I think that's pretty much what everybody has said. You can summarize the comments. But he had a degree of intimacy with people he didn't know that most of us can't have with people we spent a lifetime with. And that's a remarkable thing when someone makes you feel, and the woman over here, you said it so beautifully about, I can walk down that 5-mile stretch and know I'm going to feel safe and loved. And that wasn't just people who grew up near him. It was me who walked through the door of Joseph House, once a year or so, and he would get me, because I'm an O'Neill, with 2 redheaded daughters of my 8 children, and ask me questions and pick up the conversation where it left off the last time, just like everybody said. But I just love that intimacy, and I think we all did, and that's why the room is packed.
Vietnam. And many of us wound up in prison for a number of years. Roger was always sort of here to us. Many of us knew him. I really can't say I knew him, but my friends, Barbara Yuri, Glenn Ann, David Miller, Jim Wilson, they all knew him well. But we knew him as a supporter, as someone who could help us when we needed anything. A day in the country, a week in the country. A job at Shape Up at the New York Times. I could make more money in one shift in the New York Times than I could make in 2 months selling Catholic workers on the street. And sometimes even when you're a Catholic worker, you need a little bit of money. So in my mind, for my whole life, the name Roger O'Neill has meant kindness, generosity, compassion. And even though I feel I can't say I personally knew him, I may have met him a few times, but even though I can't say I personally knew him, he has moved my life. And as he's moved the life of all the people in this room, you must know that he has touched the lives of thousands and thousands more, very real ways than they remember. And so from that generation of Catholic workers, I'm here to say thank you to Roger and thank you to his family. And several of the people I mentioned that asked me to mention their love to you, O'Neills. So thank you, O'Neills.
Sure. Cuban shore.